and Facebook under the Let Me Bend Your Ear podcast. You can listen wherever you get your podcast. Please rate and review the show on your app of choice. You can email the show at bendyourearpodcast@gmail.com. Please visit the podcast website at letmebendyourear.com. All episodes are available there. On this episode, I'm going to review Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Now, this movie is kind of interesting because I remember it came out a little earlier this year, a couple months ago. I think it opened in March. And I remember seeing a preview of the movie before then, and the movie stars Chris Pine from Star Trek fame, a lot of other films, Hell and High Water, which is a great movie, and Michelle Rodriguez, of course, from Fast and Furious fame as well, and Hugh Grant. So I saw the preview, and it, looked like a kind of a decent movie. I wasn't sure what it was going to be. The title Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. I'll get into that more as I get into the review. On a scale of whether I was going to watch the movie or not, I saw the preview probably on another movie that I was, watching, and I probably would not have watched it, and didn't have a big interest in watching the movie. So an interesting thing happened. So the movie opens, doesn't do very well. And a couple months later, I start seeing reviews of the movie. Not right when it opened. I didn't seek it out because I wasn't going to go see it in the theater. So hence probably wasn't going to review it for the podcast. But I started to read and see all of these positive reviews of the movie. That it was entertaining. It was a surprise. So, after reading a couple of those, I'm like, wow. And again, this was, I think it probably even after it went out of theaters, it wasn't in theaters very long because, like I said, it didn't do very well, at least in the United States. I don't know what the worldwide box office was. So a couple of weeks ago, or probably about a month ago, I saw that it was streaming on Paramount Plus. So I'm like, oh, all right, it's there, and it has some positive reviews. So I finally broke down and watched it to review for the podcast. And I'll get into my review in a moment. And again, like I said, it's an interesting story with this film, and I think it's indicative of kind of where we're at as far as kind of the space where movies are now. I've said it before, we've had comic book movies that do well, and some actually not doing so well. If you look at The Flash, not doing well at all, and the last Ant-Man not doing well. Marvel's kind of, I don't know if it's Marvel fatigue or the movies aren't just as good. I know Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is probably the exception, and I'll be probably watching that soon. It's streaming on Disney Plus, so I'll probably check it out and finally review it for the podcast because I have not seen that one yet. But obviously there's even some comic book fatigue regarding, at least with Marvel, and like I said, DC is trying to do their reset under James Gunn. So there's a struggle out there, and a movie like this one, I think, even had a bigger struggle, and I'll get into that, like I said, a little bit in a moment. So this film opens, you have Edgin Darvis, who served with a group called the Harper. So in this world that's created in this film, they're an order of peacekeepers that works for obviously the royalty there. So he arrests disciples of what's called the Red Wizard, which is one of the main antagonists of the film. He arrests some of the disciples, and as revenge, they kill his wife. Now, Edgin and his wife had a small baby, but the mother was able to hide the baby before she was murdered. So the baby is alive, and he comes home to find her murdered, takes the baby, and ends up with a barbarian named Holga Kilgore. So together they leave to make a life for himself and then their baby daughter. So obviously he can't, live in the same area. So basically they roam from town to town, using theft to support themselves. So they end up teaming up with a not very good sorcerer named Simon and a con artist named Fitzwilliam. So there, they show there's a montage of them robbing different places, making money, things like that. So while attempting to steal what's called a tablet of reawakening to resurrect Edgin's wife, they're captured. So Edgin and Holga are captured, and the other ones are able to get away. And Edgin tosses the tablet to Fitzwilliam to keep for him, and they're captured. So that's the opening of the film. They're imprisoned for 2 years when they're able to go in front of the pardoning board, in a very funny scene in the movie. So the what I'm going to talk about a lot about Dungeons and Dragons is the tone of this film, which is one of its greatest assets. So the scene when they pardon themselves, they're talking to the pardoning board, and Ed Gein is telling a story, his backstory about how he got there, and he keeps asking for Christopher, one of the members of the board, that are not present. So they start without. He's like, I really want to talk to Christopher. I really want Christopher to be here. So when Christopher gets there, you'll see the reason why. I'm not going to give it away because it's actually very funny, and you'll see why when Christopher arrives, why Ed Gein wants him there. But long story short, they end up mounting a successful escape, even though you find out right after the fact that they were about to be pardoned. So their escape was unnecessary. So that made me laugh out loud, the way that was executed. And one of the great things and surprising things about Dungeons and Dragons is the tone of the film is very light, in the sense that there's a lot of funny moments in the movie. I didn't expect that at all. But it's still balanced with action, and kind of what you would expect in a kind of, not even sword and sorcery movie, because that's not the correct term. It's an adventure with some elements in there, wizards and things like that. But it's just a very strong movie regarding a team of people trying to get something done. So Ed Gein, played by Chris Pine, does a great job. He's a great lead in this movie. He's very, very funny, very, very sarcastic. It's I guess if you want to say, he's kind of like Chris Pratt's character, Star-Lord in Guardians of the Galaxy. It's kind of that tone, and it works in this movie very, very well. And the characters around him are great. So you have the sorcerer Simon, who's played by, I think, Justice Smith, who I know from Detective Pikachu. That's the only I know him from that movie. He's in it. And then you have, of course, Hugh Grant playing Fitzwilliam, who's fantastic in this movie. He's a con artist through and through, and his character in that is he's portrayed very, very funny. And Hugh Grant's always great anyway, and it's fantastic. So you also have a druid named Doric, who is she's part of the team as well, whose people are being subjugated by the leaders of the kingdom that they're in. So what happens is, flash forward when they escape. So it turns out Forge Fitzwilliam is running this town, and he brings back what's called the High Games, and of course we find out that his daughter Kira is with him, and she's got him. He's got her with him. He's taking care of her, but obviously, Argon wants to get his daughter back, and then you have that kind of dynamic of her being abandoned by her father, and Forge kind of lying about the circumstances of what happened, basically portraying it as he abandoned her, and then of course those issues ensue in the movie as well. So again, it's the tone of the movie is really, because it's tough to strike a balance when you're doing something that's humorous but not too humorous. I think what this movie succeeds at very well, it's not taking itself super seriously, just serious enough where there are stakes in what happens to them. There's real stakes that could happen. They can be killed. The stakes are high enough that you can take it seriously enough, but not too seriously where you're like rolling your eyes going, what are we doing here? And it strikes that balance of tone really, really incredibly well, and it's really incredibly entertaining. It's a fun movie, and it's great to see a movie like this that's just fun. It's you've got sword fights, you've got regular fighting, you've got magic, you've got interaction with the team. All of it is well done. All of it is well executed. And like I said, with the lead performance of Chris Pine, who's fantastic. Look, he's a great actor, and he shows it here. And like I said, he looks like he's having a ball, and the interplay between his character Ed Gein and Michelle Rodriguez's Holga is fantastic. So another humorous scene is, Holga was kind of kicked out of her people, so she basically she married a normal sized guy. So there's a cameo in this film, and I'm not going to say who the actor is because it's a big actor. So when they come back after being imprisoned, of course, her husband has moved on and married another barbarian woman. But there's a great scene where she comes to visit him, and they kind of have an awkward exchange. And but the but the cameo was great because I didn't expect it. So it's a cameo of a very very big. You'll know it the second you see him. So I'm not going to say who the cameo is because it's pretty funny. And Michelle Rodriguez is great. So obviously, you know, she's a physical actress as it is anyway. She's good with physicality, so she's got several fight scenes in the movie because she's the tough one, and that's another funny dynamic with Chris Pine's Edgin. You know, Edgin's kind of the planner, as he calls himself. He comes up with the plans. He's not really a rough and tumble Indiana Jones type hero. It's just, you know, he's the brains of the operation, in quotes, of course. So that dynamic between her and him is fantastic. It's like a brother sister dynamic, but she's the one that's tough, gets in the fights, you know, handles the business. And Michelle Rodriguez is great. She's really good in this as well, and their dynamic is great. And again, Hugh Grant is fantastic. So as the plot moves forward, it gets to the climax of the High Games where he's trying to get the tablet to get, you know, obviously to resurrect his wife, bring his wife back so he can, of course, have her back. Of course, have his daughter get to know her mother because, of course, she was a baby when she was murdered. And there is another fantastic character in the movie as well that helps him to get the to get the tablet. So he is played by, I forgot the actor's name. I guess he's in that show Bridgerton on Netflix, and so he's basically, he talks a lot. So he's very verbose, and you know, just basically is. But he's, you know, he's a stand-up guy. But it's great because the dynamic with his character and Arkin is basically he's consistently irritated by the fact that he won't stop talking. The guy talks nonstop, and but he's a hero and he's selfless and he does all these things to help them. So you can't help but like him. But it's very funny. It's Roger Jean Page. I'm sure I'm killing his name. So his character is Zenk, who's a paladin. So he, like I said, he helps them to get on their quest to get where the tablet is. And then of course you have the main antagonist, along with it ends up being Forge, Hugh Grant's character. You have Sophina, who's the Red Wizard. So she's kind of has a plot to take over fully this town, and I'll leave it at that. There's nothing else I need to add. But she's a wizard, so obviously she has sorcery at her command, and she's the main antagonist of the film, along with Fitzwilliam. So, like I said, this movie is a whole bunch of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's entertaining. I've seen actually the movie twice because after I watched it, I watched it again with my now 10-year-old son, and he loved it. Very entertaining. It's PG-13. I don't think there's anything too crazy in there. You know, 10, 11-year-old I think can watch it. I mean, I talked to my wife about it because I said, hey, I'm gonna have our son watch it, and I told her it's Dungeons and Dragons, so she immediately was like, wait a minute, Dungeons and Dragons, isn't that Wizard Clank game? And she wasn't too down with that. And this really comes to the crux of, I think, the problem of why this movie didn't do well. I have never played Dungeons and Dragons, or I think I played it once in the 80s when I was a kid and barely remember the game because I think I was bored by it. I have no idea what this movie has to do with Dungeons and Dragons. Now, every single character in this movie, for all I know, could be from Dungeons and Dragons. That's totally possible, or at least what they are. You know, you have druids and wizards and paladins and all that stuff. That may all be from the game, but I think the biggest mistake that these movie makers made was calling this Dungeons and Dragons, because you don't have to play the game, know the game, and I think it turned people off, probably including me. Because, like I said, my intention to see this movie was probably zero. I wasn't going to see it at all. When I saw the trailer, I didn't look into it further. Like I said, I didn't start reading reviews for it until a couple of months after it had already been out, and I think already out of the theaters. So I really think they made a mistake by tying it to Dungeons and Dragons. They should have just called. I mean, the subtitle is even better. Honor Among Thieves is actually a better title that describes this movie better. They should have just called it that and ran with that. I don't know if it would have helped the box office. It was a March release, so when you're releasing movies in March, other than comic book movies, when you're releasing a property that's not really well known, that's not a sequel, that's usually, not a good time. That's usually the dead zone for movies, at least nowadays, where movie companies allegedly, may or may not dump movies, is January to probably April, I would think. Not that there's some exceptions of movies that do well, but usually May is going to start the summer season, like the end of May, and then going May, June, July, August is your big summer movies. So this movie was kind of dumped out there in March, maybe because they didn't think they'd have much competition and it would give it a chance to do better. But they really goofed by naming this Dungeons and Dragons. I think that just took away a lot of people's interest. They see that and go, that's a game for teenagers and maybe sometimes referenced in Stranger Things. I'm not interested in that. And I think that's a shame because this is a really entertaining movie. I would recommend this movie highly. I'll get to my review in a second, but like I said, I think really the marketing here was not good. And which I think would include the trailers, because I think the trailers, if I remember, and I didn't look at the trailers before I recorded this episode, I don't know if the trailers downplayed the kind of funnier elements of it and beefed up the action adventure elements of it, which that's not a terrible thing to do, but the real asset to this movie is its sense of humor. And like I said, the way it balances that still with stakes that are, dire enough. Like I said, it raises the stakes enough where you're taking it seriously enough, but the humor just really levels it out. It's just a great. I give the filmmakers a lot of credit because I think that's a tough tone to strike without having it go one or the other way, go wonky, but it's not. It's so entertaining. And watching it the second time, I liked it even more the second time. Not that I didn't like it the first time. It's really good. And like I said, I've watched it twice. I'll see it again. I may even see it with my wife. I can get her to watch it a third time because she hasn't seen it yet. But I highly recommend Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Definitely check it out. It's streaming on Paramount Plus now. I'm sure you can rent it where you get anything digital. It is streaming now there, so it's available right now if you want to see it. As far as my review, I'm going to give Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves 4 stars out of 5. Again, hugely entertaining. If you're a fan of Chris Pine, check this movie out. It's fun. It's funny. There's action adventure. It's really, really well done. I mean, I found myself laughing out loud in a good way a bunch of times through this movie. It's like I said, it really strikes a very, very good tone, and a tone I wasn't expecting, and a tone that was extremely entertaining. So I highly recommend Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Things. I can see why the critical notices have been overwhelmingly positive, and I completely agree. And like I said, this is a movie that I would have never thought, like I said, that I was going to have a desire to watch. And these are my favorite kind of movies. And you've heard me talk about movies like this from time to time. And what I mean by that is a movie that you fully don't expect to either never watch or thinking it's not anything that would be your cup of tea, or worse, wouldn't be very good, and to be completely pleasantly surprised by this movie. So like I said, if you follow the show on Twitter, I posted a couple of weeks ago. I don't go to the movies enough to see enough new movies all the time to give you like my top 10 movies of the year so far. What I've done is I posted my favorite movies that I've seen of this year so far, and I put this movie on that list. So my list right now, to make sure I get it right, is Air, Across the Spider-Verse, Mission Impossible, Dungeons and Dragons, Oppenheimer, and I think I may be missing one, but those have been my favorite movies so far this year. And again, I'm giving Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves 4 stars out of 5. Like I said, I highly recommend it. Check it out. I think it's an entertaining movie. I think a lot of people, hopefully if you listen to this episode, will go back and check it out, because like I said, the box office was terrible. It was a flop. Now, what I did read a couple of days ago, which is encouraging, is Paramount is seriously considering, even though it didn't do well, making a sequel with a lower budget to stream directly. Now, that could be a great idea in the sense that I think they even realized, one, the great critical notices that the movie had, and I'm assuming based on those critical notices, and I have no access to this kind of data, but I'm thinking that the streaming of this film on Paramount Plus has been hugely successful, because the fact that they're even considering making a sequel to streaming tells me that the numbers that they've had for streaming this film have been fantastic, and that to them makes it worth the expense of a second movie, probably with a lower budget. But I'm not surprised that they're going to do that, because that tells me that the streaming numbers must be fantastic, and I can see why. I've already seen it twice. Like I said, it's a great movie. I highly recommend it. So again, Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, I'm giving 4 stars out of 5. Like I said, definitely check it out. I think you will enjoy it greatly, and it'll be a film that you'll probably revisit. Like I said, I've seen it twice, and it's a lot of fun, and I think I would see it a third time easily and not have an issue with it. It's really, really entertaining. So definitely check it out. Again, Honor Among Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, 4 stars out of 5. Thank you. You can follow the show on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Threads. The handle is @BendYourEarPod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the Facebook page. This is a one-man operation. If you're watching the show on Facebook or YouTube and would like to support the podcast, you can click on the QR code on the top left corner, or you can go to the show's Twitter page @BendYourEarPod and click on the tip jar. This will help cover the cost of hosting this podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great week.